What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network, on Peacock, and on Vice. As today we're talking the Season 3 finale of Dark Side of the Ring, Season 3, Episode 14, the much-anticipated Steroid Trials episode of the show. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. I am familiar to a certain extent with the Steroid Trials. I've heard a lot about them over the years. Not exactly put into documentary form, though, up until this point. So I was really looking forward to this one, and I'm glad they saved the best for last. Because I honestly believe this was definitely the best episode so far. Not even so far, the season's over. The best episode of this half of Season 3. I would have to go back and remember what they did in the first half. The first half was good from what I can recall. A lot of good, albeit sometimes disturbing episodes in that first half of the season, and the second half of the season was no different. I really enjoyed the Plane Ride from Hell episode to a certain extent. A lot of it was just fucked up. The Steroid Trials episode wasn't fucked up, it was more so just interesting. The Plane Ride from Hell episode stands out as being one of the better, more memorable ones. I didn't really give a fuck about the FMW stuff. The XPW stuff was slightly interesting. I just don't really care about the whole fucking extreme porn wrestling promotion shit. I think that's just weird. There was a lot of other stuff we saw in between those episodes, but I don't know. The first one really stood out. The Luna Vachon one was good. That one was decent. The Johnny Canine one was actually very entertaining. And this one I thought was very informative and interesting as well. So let's get right into it. I apologize in advance if I forget any details or I don't go into enough detail with certain aspects of the episodes. I'm merely going off of what I saw while watching it, and there were many points. And I didn't watch this live. I just watched this today, actually. It was Halloween yesterday, and it's been a really busy week/weekend. So I only just got into it today. And while watching it, I had to stop it a lot. I had to stop the episode quite a few times to kind of make notes and details, because we got a lot of talking heads in this episode, which was great. A lot of wrestling journalists and reporters, and Jerry McDevitt, the WWE attorney, which was very interesting. I'm very glad they got him. We got two totally different perspectives on this episode. But yeah, I had to stop it a lot to write down the details. And again, I didn't grow up with the Steroid Trials. I'm not, an expert with the Steroid Trials with WWF at the time. So I'm just going off what I saw here, my thoughts on it, and there we go. So let's get right into it. Jerry McDevitt was the first person that we're introduced to on the episode. As I just mentioned, the go-to attorney for WWE for nearly 30 years. He was involved in the Benoit tragedy situation, kind of helping WWE cover their tracks with that and kind of defending the company on that front. The Owen Hart situation over 20 years ago, defending the company on that front. And both episodes, I think, were the respective season finales of Season 1. Oh, no, wait. Benoit was Season 2, the kickoff. I was going to say that was the Season 1 finale, which would have been interesting because this is the Season 3 finale. Owen Hart, for a fact, definitely ended Season 2. But yeah, very interesting that they would kind of mention both situations and that he was in the trenches with WWE for both of those very scary situations, because Dark Side of the Ring has already covered them in seasons past. We hear from Jim Ross very briefly. He was not a part of this episode really much at all. They probably just got a quick comment from him on Jerry McDevitt in one of the other episodes they interviewed him for, probably the Plane Ride from Hell episode or another episode. But he calls Jerry McDevitt a very intelligent man, to the point where it's almost scary. We hear from Wade Keller, I think for the first time on one of these episodes, obviously from the PW Torch. Wade Keller, a very respected, well-known journalist within the pro wrestling media. He was on site for the entire trial, way back when in the early 90s. Dave Meltzer, of course, also makes an appearance and is a very prominent talking head on the episode. Obviously, of Wrestling Observer newsletter fame and the Wrestling Observer radio and whatever else. Everyone knows Dave Meltzer. If you're involved in the, if you know anything about wrestling, you know Dave Meltzer. But yeah, he said that WWF would not have been nearly as successful without Hulk Hogan at the helm when he was in the late 80s and early 90s. We hear from a gentleman named John Arizzi as well. I've definitely either seen him before or have heard of him. He hosted a show called Pro Wrestling Spotlight for a very long time. I don't know if he still does. But again, another prominent figure within the pro wrestling journalism media realm. He just looks very familiar to me. Maybe because I thought it was Mike Johnson, a PW Insider. I don't know. But he looked very familiar, and maybe he's been in other episodes. I don't know. But he says that wrestling became more cartoonish in the 80s, and as a result of that, and becoming more larger than life, a lot of these promotions, or WWF specifically, needed their wrestlers, or wanted their wrestlers, not really necessarily needed, and we'll get into that, but wanted their wrestlers on steroids to make them look as big as possible and as ridiculous as possible to kind of match their personas. We hear from Warlord of the Powers of Pain, and he talks about taking steroids during this point. We find out, I guess it was one of the stats, that 90% of the performers at that point in time were taking steroids in one form or another. Dr. George Sahorian, who this episode is really all about, he was not interviewed for this episode. I think they probably reached out for comment, but he either declined or they didn't get back for comment or whatever. But he was the ringside physician. He was the ringside physician for WWF at that point. He was also a very big fan of the wrestlers. He was a big pro wrestling fan. He was involved with some of the angles. And he would go to the performers after the match, go to some of the superstars, go to tend to their injuries, and he would open up their bag, his doctor bag, and it would be filled with steroids and stuff of that nature, according to Warlord. B. Brian Blair, who we've heard on other episodes of this show before, says the same thing. The guy would open his bag, he would have steroids, he would have Percocets, he would have painkillers, anything you could possibly imagine. Even if it wasn't in the bag, he said he could get it for you. So this guy was, he was really the I don't know what word you would use, but he was the conductor of this whole situation investigation in terms of being responsible for giving the steroids. And other athletes around this point in time in the early 90s were already getting busted for having steroids. This was when it kind of came out, hey, steroids are not good, and it's a performance-enhancing drug and all this other stuff. Like, people probably shouldn't be using them to cheat. And that was when the spotlight kind of turned over to WWF and sports entertainment in the early 90s. McDevitt says the government never actually told people who bought steroids before they bought them and used them and whatever, the negative effects of using said steroids. I guess the idea was that it would help your performance and then there wouldn't be any negative backlash, even though there was, so he blames the government for that. We hear about a guy named William Dunn, who was a weightlifting coach, I believe. He got busted for giving steroids to teen athletes, and that was really, I guess, the major focus of the whole steroid spotlight in the early 90s, was that they were being given to teen athletes on football teams and sports teams and stuff like that. And he was one of the people responsible for that. And he blamed Zahorian. There was a phone call made. It's like an actual, it's proven that the two were having a conversation. He doesn't even sound like a doctor, according to, I think, McDevitt. And if you hear the conversation, he's right. He just sounds like some fucking weirdo off the street that just so happened to have all these drugs and all this other stuff. All this other stuff that teen athletes probably shouldn't be using. So Zahorian gets blamed for it. He gets thrown out of the bus by William Dunn. Linda finds out about this through a colleague at WWE. She finds out about it, sends out an internal memo telling everyone, hey, this guy's not welcomed at our show anymore. Please cut ties with Zahorian. Please distance ourselves from this guy. We do not want to be involved with him any longer, after they found out what he was guilty of and what he was involved in. B. Brian Blair recalls getting a knock on his door one night from the FBI, and they tell him, hey, we know you've been getting FedEx packages from Zahorian. We know you've gotten 3 recently, and we investigated them at the mail center or whatever, which it's the FBI, so they can. And then they were just sent to you. So you can't deny it. We know that there's steroids in there. We know for a fact that what's going on here. What we're going to do is, if you help us testify, we will not prosecute you. We're not going to go after you. We'll leave you alone. So just help us testify. And he said, yeah, he agreed to do it. Hogan gets dragged into it because I guess when they were going through Zahorian's office or whatever, they found a picture of Zahorian, Vince, and Hulk. So they're like, maybe Hulk has something to do with this. He's probably guilty of taking the roids as well. And it was weird, according to some of the people they interviewed on this episode, how it was weird that they forced some people to go and testify, but not others. I mean, like I said, it was 90% of the roster, apparently, according to one stat, that was taking steroids at this point in time. So why some people and not others? And it was just like, obviously the Hogans and the Warriors were the most prominent names, but there were a lot of other people lower level on the card. Why B. Brian Blair, of all people? You know what I mean? Like, it was a very random name. So the inconsistency there was indeed strange. Hogan was asked to testify, but he got dismissed from testifying because it would hurt his career, according to the defense, or I think even McDevitt, I think he was the one who had claimed that. And Phil Mushnick talks about this. He's from the New York Post. He was one of the people that covered the steroid trials back in the 90s, specifically in their involvement with WWE and whatnot. He's like, of course it would hurt his career because he would have to tell the truth. about using the roids and everything else. So of course that would hurt his career. That's stupid. Like, of course he would testify, according to Mushnick. Or at least that's why he should testify. So Zahorian said, actually, he kind of threw Vince and Hogan under the bus and saying that Vince and Hogan bought their steroids from him. So there was indeed the connection there. Vince had to go to the media and say, listen, there will be drug testing going forward. We will scan and test and screen all of our performers for performance-enhancing drugs and other stuff like that, steroids. Meanwhile, I don't know if it was the same day or just around that same time, Hulk Hogan was on the Arsenio Hall show, and he gets asked about this whole thing, and he actually admits to taking roids, but for rehab reasons. And the reasons he gave were completely dumb. I think he told the truth, but in a certain way where it kind of protected himself and whatever, and I guess Meltzer said that in speaking to Vince told Meltzer that he told Hogan to tell the truth. And Hogan went on there, and he lied. Meltzer knows he lied. Everyone knew that he was lying. What he said did not pass the, whatever Wade Keller said, the public consumption sniff test or whatever he had said. And it was pretty obvious. It was pretty evident, pretty apparent that this guy was lying through his teeth. So Vince got called out about this on the Phil Donahue show. And it's an incredible visual of Vince there with other people, including John Orizzi and Dave Meltzer with his wacky hair at that point. And he's just kind of being just completely fucking destroyed by all of these people on the show and getting yelled at by Phil Donahue for lying and all this other shit. So I guess it was right after that Orizzi tells this story that he was home and his mom lived with him at that point and he was off doing something else. His mom answered the door and two guys in black suits came to the door and said, "Hey, does John Orizzi live here?" And she said, "Yeah, that's my son, blah, blah, blah. This is his place." They said that he lives in a very dangerous neighborhood, and then they left. So they didn't, beat him up or anything. This wasn't the XPW episode. They didn't take his thumb off. They didn't threaten him. I guess they threatened him by not threatening him by saying that he lived in a dangerous neighborhood. McDevitt immediately responds. We hear from McDevitt who says that it was fabled, and this was the real fucking kick of the balls of the episode. He goes, "No one cares enough about John Orizzi to go after him." So McDevitt says that's completely ridiculous. Orizzi is adamant that it happened, so believe who you want to believe. But that was quite the shot there from McDevitt. Holy shit. Whether it's true or not, I mean, that's a pretty harsh thing to say. So Mushnick and McDevitt kind of go back and forth, not with each other, but we hear from McDevitt and then we hear from Mushnick about the subpoenas and going, discussing that whole shit. So that was when the grand jury investigation began. And it was around this point that McDevitt was like, all right, I got to learn everything I possibly can about steroids so I'm prepared for every possibility of everything that is to come my way during this trial. That's why he's the best of the best, because this guy prepares like no one else. And he had to learn everything he possibly could about the roids. McMahon actually accused Mushnick of being an FBI informant. And Mushnick's like, listen, why would I'm an FBI informant in the sense that I'm informing the FBI of what's going on here with my writing in the New York Post. Mushnick was great here, too. His clapbacks with McDevitt, I wish we can get these guys in the same room again. That would have been amazing. The back and forth here between these two on this episode was very well done. I thought it was great. So McMahon, according to Mushnick, he tried to get heat on him, or he tried to get dirt on him, rather. I'm speaking like a wrestler here. He tried to get dirt on him. And one of the guys went out to dinner with Mushnick, and Mushnick was like, "Hey, listen, if you want something on me," because the guy had told him, "Hey, I know you're a nice guy. I'm just doing my job." And Mushnick was like, "Well, it's a shitty job. Well, if you want to run with anything, I did pot in college. I smoked marijuana in college. So if you want to run with that as the dirt on me, go right ahead." So he made friends with the guy, and McMahon really going out of his way to really be petty and go after the people that went after him. Not intentionally, but, Mushnick was just writing about what was going on. He didn't sound like he had it out for WWE. He was just kind of telling the truth and wanted to see the truth come to light. So anyway, where was I in my notes here? So yeah, we end up hearing about the limo driver, I think for Vince or some of the WWE superstars, James Stewart. He claims that he actually was the one who delivered the steroids, but he didn't testify because he would have been committing perjury had he testified, so that's why he didn't testify. And he also could not be reached for comment on the episode. Hogan left the WWF in 1993 that summer. I think his last match was with Yokozuna, right? The 93 King of the Ring pay-per-view. A fucking terrible match, by the way. And McMahon got indicted that November. Everyone calls the trial a complete circus. All the media, wrestling media was there. Meltzer, Orizzi, Wade Keller, fans were there. It was just a complete... it's a pro wrestling trials, or what do you expect, Vince actually showed up to the courthouse with the neck brace on. And everyone claims, he did it for sympathy. McDevitt says Vince needed a neck surgery around that point, and he just opted to get it because he was off TV in 93, so why not just get it while he was off TV dealing with this shit? So that was his excuse. Who knows what the actual, explanation is or whatever. Sean O'Shea leads the prosecution team against Vince and the entire WWF. Hogan and Warrior are among those set to testify. There was a woman named Laura Brevetti. She repped Vince. Well, McDevitt repped WWF. And because McDevitt and Hogan kind of knew each other, that was why he couldn't rep Vince. So to kind of get out of that, and that would have been an issue, they couldn't do that. So he repped the WWF instead. So that allowed them 2 cross-examinations. So this McDevitt guy, if you couldn't already tell, knows exactly what the fuck he's doing, like I said earlier. Warlord went in there and he just told the truth. And he said what a lot of the other guys said, that he just took the steroids before he arrived in WWF, which is the truth. So they didn't really have a lot of dirt on Vince, and it kind of made the prosecution team look dumb, because a lot of these people were brought in and said, hey, these people were doing the roids. They didn't deny doing steroids, but they denied Vince ever telling these people to do the steroids. So it was referred to as a witch hunt. That's what it kind of came across at this point in time. We hear from Nails, and this was probably one of the best parts of the episode. The fucking wrestler Nails was, among those that testified. He claims that Vince told him to take steroids, and you're thinking, oh shit, here we go. And then McDevitt was like, he brought up the fact, and I think even in court he brought up a picture of Nails in WWE. The guy wears a fucking jumpsuit, because he was, straight out of prison. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. And he was like, why would Vince ever tell this guy to take steroids when you couldn't even see his physique? He wasn't a Hogan, he wasn't a Warrior. Why the hell would this guy ever be told to take steroids? His body is really of no importance here if that's the gear that he's wearing. And I guess someone from, someone that was, while he was testifying, someone asked him, do you have any animosity? Do you have any animosity towards Vince McMahon? And he said no. And then someone said, do you even know what animosity means? And he said, no. And they asked him, do you hate Vince McMahon? And he said, yes. So it was just incredible. I mean, why would you even bring that guy in? I mean, seriously, fucking Nails, come on, man. Really? Oh, man, that was great. Zahorian was actually brought in to testify from his jail cell, and apparently, he had no idea what he was being brought in for. He had no idea that these steroid trials were even going on with WWF. He was just already in prison for 44 days. He wrote a whole letter about it, how he was kept in, confinement facilities that were way more serious than what he should have been in there for. And he didn't deserve it, and he was kind of bounced around from place to place, so he was brought in. Originally, he did not admit, when they asked him about what was going on here with the Vince stuff, he said that he knew nothing about it. He knew nothing about Vince's situation. And then they played the phone call that he had with Dunn, and then he was like, oh yeah, I actually do remember having a convo with Vince. It's like, okay, what's going on here, buddy? Clearly, he did have a convo with Vince, and he knew who Vince was and whatever, because he was involved with him. But he denied the whole steroids thing at first, and then he did it. I mean, it was the way that he went back and forth throughout the episode. Unless I'm missing something here, it was just very confusing and weird to me. That was probably the weirdest, and I wish they went into more detail about that, unless that's exactly what happened. And the guy because didn't they say earlier that he admitted to working with Vince and Hogan on the steroids, and that was when Vince had to go to the media, and he had to instill the, drug policy and whatever, so that completely confused me. But he did say that he sold steroids to the wrestlers and that Vince never told him to stop. Vince's assistant, Emily Feinberg, testified, but Brevetti had a response to everything she said. And apparently, her husband, Brevetti's husband, was a reporter who pretended to work and represent 60 Minutes, the show. And he called up Mushnick, the husband did, the reporter, claiming to be with 60 Minutes. And Mushnick didn't tell him anything, because he's like, if I told you, I'm not going to tell you anything anyway, but all I have to share is in my writing. I've already shared everything that there is going on here. He finds out later that the guy did not work for 60 Minutes, but rather was was the brother of a producer from 60 Minutes. So the way it was, said here was very weird. The guy was very sketchy, and McDevitt denies all of it, because obviously, even if it was true, why would he, admit to it? But I guess the husband, that's why Feinberg's accusations were all kind of shut down by Brevetti, was because the husband got information for her about a book deal or something like that, so she gave him everything that she knew because she didn't know any better and didn't know that this guy wasn't legit. So again, like I said, McDevitt denies everything. And then Vince issued a response calling everyone yellow journalists and all this other stuff. Oh, gentlemen, what do you think you're doing? Did you think it'd be that easy? Was that your best? Did you give it your best or something really condescending? Vince was indicted in Long Island, even though Hogan was never delivered steroids anywhere in the area, whether it be the Long Island Coliseum or MSG. So Meltzer's why the fuck was he even indicted in Long Island to begin with? It should have been in Connecticut. That was another issue. Hogan was granted immunity. And he was in WCW at that point, so a lot of people thought he would just go in there and bury Vince. He would just bury Vince and, put him behind bars if he wanted to. And it was really up to him, depending on what Hogan said, that really determined the outcome of the trial. But he went up there and said Vince didn't sell him anything. He merely called it that they were gym buddies and would exchange steroids. He admitted to taking steroids, but never said, that Vince, forced him to do it or that he told him to take it or whatever. They merely just, exchanged steroids. That was the extent of it, according to what Hogan said here. And Hogan even claimed years later on a radio show, I think The Torch or whatever, that Vince did not go to prison because of him. Because of Hogan's, testimonial or whatever, that was why Vince didn't go to jail. Despite him kind of going to bat for Vince was still furious over him testifying, which was fucking dumb because he saved his ass. So I'm not really sure why he would be upset about that. McDevitt says that Vince didn't testify because why would he? What would he say? There was no evidence against him, he says, so why would he testify? O'Shea, the prosecution leader or whatever, kind of went off on Vince, and O'Shea declined to be interviewed for this. Jerry got really emotional at one point. He doesn't really strike me as the type of person that would get emotional. I guess Vince was even at his wedding, but doesn't get emotional about that. But he does get emotional about O'Shea going off on Vince and seeing Stephanie run out of the courtroom in tears and crying in the back. And McDevitt obviously probably thinks the world of Stephanie, and he gets really upset talking about that and seeing how it affected Stephanie and all this other stuff. So he was like, listen, I haven't even had the chance to speak yet, so just give it time and we'll have an answer for everything that's going on here, so just don't worry. So anyway, McDevitt talks about how all the wrestlers were taking Anvar, and it had to be pulled from the market, but it never was. And O'Shea was like, oh yeah, I guess he wanted to keep it from coming out that it wasn't pulled from the market, even though it was, ordered to be. And the judge says, well, it wasn't pulled from the market. And that was really what did them in. That was really what helped WWF in Vince's case here. McDevitt never thought they would lose. Probably that's just his optimism, he says, but he never thought for a single second they would lose. And I guess 90% of cases in federal court end in conviction, but not this one. Not this one. They didn't have to call a single witness because I guess it was either a genius move or the dumbest move ever. But he knew that his case was solid and he wasn't going to lose, and he's very confident. So they didn't bring in a single witness on their end. And it came back not guilty. And Arezzi, I guess who was there, said it was a big pop in wrestling terms in the courtroom. Everyone was really happy for Vince. Maybe not everyone, but it was a big reaction on his end. Meltzer mentions that they were all on steroids. There was just never any conspiracy. So I don't think he ever says, oh, they should have lost, they should have won, whatever. It was pretty evident they were all on steroids. But there was just no conspiracy with Vince telling them to take roids. I think the problem was that he didn't tell them to take roids. Maybe he did, and all the wrestlers lied, who knows. But, at best, they were doing it, but he wasn't telling them not to, and they never had a drug policy in place. That is a Vince McMahon problem. That is one of the biggest problems with this whole thing. He wasn't telling them to take steroids, but he was still allowing it to happen. He was aware of it. He was exchanging steroids with Hogan. That should have been a no-no enough, the stigma around it wasn't bad enough to where they could really indict him on that and really put him behind bars for that. He would have served 8 years or something like that and faced up to $500,000 in fines if so. So, very interesting there. But Arezzi says that Vince dodged the bullet. And to close out the episode, McDevitt says that they had dinner afterward to celebrate. And they had a lot of cocktails, and I guess Vince even ripped off his neck brace at one point, because McDevitt said, oh, you could take it off now. And he clarified, McDevitt, I don't know if the neck brace was, I guess he said it was legit. The neck surgery was legit. He doesn't say, oh, he was faking it the whole time. Vince took off the neck brace and whipped it around before immediately putting it back on. So he does cover his tracks there. But, very interesting stuff. And when asked about what his bond with Vince is like, he calls it unbreakable. And that's why he had the guy at his wedding a couple of years ago. And it was definitely a recent picture because that was when Vince had the shorter hair. It looked like it was in the early 2010s, if not the late 2000s, in the 08, 09 area. But at any rate, great stuff here. I really enjoyed this episode. And again, whether they left certain people out or should have talked to more people or should have went into more about it. I think this could have easily been a 2-hour episode. I'm sure there's plenty more to this that wasn't covered. I haven't really looked at people's reactions because I didn't want to be spoiled. But I thought this was great. I really did think they did a great job with this one. Getting McDevitt was key. McDevitt really made the episode. I mean, I've never even seen the guy. I've heard his name before for various stuff like this, like various stories and events and whatever. Never actually seen or heard from the guy. So the fact they were able to get him for this, albeit defending everything WWE did, because why wouldn't he? I thought was really, really great. He added a lot to the episode. Mushnick was great. We had Meltzer on there, or Rizzy, not saying they were amazing. I mean, Meltzer I don't really care too much for, but, I thought he played his role well, and he was kind of involved with it a little bit, so he was a necessary presence on the show. They didn't have a lot of wrestlers talking about, like, oh, I did testify or I didn't testify. Warlord was among those that testified, and he talks about his testimonial. No one else was. I mean, a lot of the people, I guess, that testified are dead. I mean, Hogan wasn't involved in this episode. No surprise there. Warrior's dead. Rick Rude was among those that testified. He died. So Nails, I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he wasn't interviewed for this. But overall, I thought it was very well done. And the people that they, probably maybe could have gotten on, like an O'Shea, for example, Sean O'Shea, he was reached out for comment and he denied. So anyway, I thought it was a great episode. Thoroughly enjoyed this, and I thought it was an awesome way to close out season 3. Some hit or misses, more misses than hits, I think. Like I said, the FMW episode I don't really give a shit about. A lot of hardcore wrestling on the season. The XPW stuff, I liked the Luna Vachon episode. I liked the Plane Ride from Hell episode to a certain extent. The Johnny Kanon episode was really well done. So, interesting stuff here on Season 3 of Dark Side of the Ring. And it very well might be their last. Because I think before Season 1 ended, definitely before Season 2 ended, they got greenlit for a 3rd season and for a next season. As of right now, they have not been greenlit for another season. Usually it's around the time that this season is coming to an end. The season is now over, and we have no word on a potential 4th season. I would find it very hard to believe. I mean, Vice is doing all these Dark Side shows now on their own network. You see the fucking commercials for it if you watch their... In the commercials for Vice, or during Dark Side of the Ring, are these commercials for all these Dark Side shows. Dark Side of the 90s, Dark Side of football, Dark Side of this and that. So, clearly, they're piggybacking all the success of this show. The ratings, I don't think, were great. They weren't as high as last season, or for whatever reason, I don't know, but... Maybe because it's on a Thursday as opposed to a Tuesday before. I'm not exactly sure. But still, I've enjoyed the show, and I really do hope they bring it back for a 4th season, because it's a great show, and if you haven't caught up on all the other episodes, first of all, I've reviewed them all here on the channel, so check those out. But you can check them all out, I think, on Hulu, and I think that's where Seasons 1 and 2 are available. And if you have on-demand like Xfinity or something like that, all the other episodes from the season are up there as well. So check those out when you get a chance. But thank you guys for checking out this edition of WWE Network and Chill. I appreciate it. Be sure to drop a comment, like the video, share the video, and subscribe for more daily content. Hit the bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up. We've had a lot of interviews go up lately with Skylar Gray, Indy Hartwell, Rey Mysterio. Jeff Jarrett's coming up very soon, I promise you. That should have been up last week, but it is coming this week. Booker T coming up, QT Marshall, Roman Reigns a few weeks ago. So a lot of interviews you guys are going to not want to miss, and check out here on the channel. I would greatly appreciate if you support the other content going up here on the channel every single day. So have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews. Have an awesome week, and I'll catch your ass down the road.